Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to really pull out the key nuggets of knowledge from the sources we look at each time. And today, we're jumping into a really big one, something that's constantly in the news, constantly debated. The U.S. border and immigration. This goes way beyond just, lines on a map. It's about people, it's about laws, and the huge challenge of managing who comes and goes. So our mission today, we've got a stack of sources offering a specific look at how things were approached during the Trump administration. We'll be digging into claims about border security, some specific policy shifts, and importantly, the difficulties in actually making those changes happen on the ground. Think friction between, say, federal government and local cities. The goal is just to help you understand what the reports actually said about all this complexity. Okay, so let's get into it. These sources, they give us a window into those efforts to change border policy and what that really looked like.
Yeah, and what's really striking, I think, is how the sources don't just give you the headlines. They get into the weeds, the details, sometimes even conflicting accounts of how policies were actually implemented. From the big federal directives all the way down to what individual cities decided to do. It
Yeah,
really shows that whole ecosystem.
that's a great point. An ecosystem. So our sources describe the Trump administration's stated goals for border enforcement. And the framing was pretty direct. They talked about removing, and these are the terms used, gang members, drug lords, and really bad dudes, at what they called an unprecedented rate. Some sources even describe the effort as a military operation.
That's quite a framing.
It is. And the stated emphasis, reportedly, was also on making migration safe, lawful, and orderly. This was often mentioned in the context of the U.S. and Mexico working together on managing, quote, the most legally crossed land border on the planet.
Right, acknowledging the scale of it.
Exactly. And the sources dive into some key policy changes aimed at this. For example, Department of Homeland Security memos cited in the material we looked at, well, they noted an expansion of expedited deportation.
Okay, what did that mean practically?
Well, previously, it was apparently limited mostly to people in the U.S. for just 2 weeks or less. But these memos reportedly expanded that potentially to anyone in the country for up to 2 years.
Wow, that's a significant expansion.
It is. And another thing, reported by the Washington Post, was this new provision. It involved immediately sending Mexican immigrants caught at the border back to Mexico while they waited for their deportation hearings.
Instead of housing them in the U.S.
Right. Instead of using U.S. detention facilities, the stated goal there was, saving detention space, saving resources.
So if you connect those dots, I mean, the bigger picture seems to be a real push towards quicker processing, quicker removal. The idea, as described, was to ease the load on U.S. detention centers and sort of make the whole deportation process faster, more streamlined.
Yeah, efficiency seems key. But like you said, implementation is where things get complex. Despite these new directives, our sources also indicated there were reports of, well, internal resistance. Challenges lingered. For instance, some policies from the previous administration, specifically what's often called catch and release.
Where people were released into the U.S. to wait for court dates.
Exactly. That reportedly continued, though maybe less widely, in a minority of Border Patrol sectors, according to the sources.
So the new policy wasn't universally applied immediately?
Apparently not, based on these reports.
Right.
And it got even more specific. Brandon Judd, who's president of the National Border Patrol Council, he reportedly told LifeZette, which is now Pazette, that this continuation wasn't, quote, the administration's fault.
Oh, whose fault was it then, according to him?
He apparently placed the blame on Border Patrol's fault, specifically pointing fingers at U.S. Border Patrol managers. Said they were resisting the new directives, not the officers on the front lines, but the managers.
That's interesting. So internal agency dynamics playing a role.
Right. It really highlights this crucial point, doesn't it? It wasn't just about announcing a policy. It was about getting it fully implemented everywhere, down the line. What does that tell us about, trying to change things in a big federal agency?
Well, it really raises that fundamental question of how policy actually travels, right? From the top down through these big agencies. And you see different levels of buy-in or maybe resistance within the organization itself. It just shows how complicated it is to get widespread change in a large decentralized system. Local habits or interpretations can stick around.
Yeah, policy isn't just words on paper.
Exactly. It's about the people inside the bureaucracy carrying it out, or maybe not carrying it out exactly as intended. Does this kind of thing, this internal resistance, seem common across different administrations based on what we read, or was this unique?
That's a really good question. The sources definitely paint a nuanced picture there. And these policies, they weren't happening in isolation either. They bumped up against other immigration issues, things like refugee resettlement and those debates about sanctuary cities.
Ah, right. The local versus federal tension.
Precisely. For example, the Associated Press reported on at least 140 Somali refugees. They were eventually settled in the U.S., but only after being blocked for days because of President Trump's travel ban affecting several Muslim-majority countries.
So that shows the immediate impact of those broader executive actions.
Yes. And then you have the sanctuary city clashes, which were really pronounced. The New York Post, for instance, reported on a case in New York City. An alleged gang member from El Salvador, who was in the country illegally, was released from Rikers Island. This was under Mayor Bill de Blasio's sanctuary city rules, and it apparently defied a federal request, an ICE detainer, to hold him for deportation.
And ICE likely wasn't happy about that.
No. The report quotes Thomas Decker, an ICE field office director in New York, saying, "This man is by his own admission a member of a violent street gang, and he was released back into the community."
Wow. That's a direct conflict playing out.
A very direct conflict. But then you see the complete opposite approach reported elsewhere. NorthJersey.com covered the mayor of Montvale, New Jersey, Michael Gassali. He's actually a Syrian immigrant himself. His family fled Aleppo back in 1980. And he publicly promised Montvale would not be a sanctuary city while he was mayor.
Interesting. So an immigrant mayor taking that stance.
Yeah, he stated his loyalty was to the laws of the U.S. as adopted country, even if he personally didn't agree with every single law.
That's just fascinating, isn't it? The clear tension shown right there between federal enforcement priorities and what cities decide to do locally. You literally have two completely different paths being taken by different municipalities. It raises huge questions about jurisdiction, local control.
It really does such a stark contrast. New York City doing one thing, Montvale, New Jersey doing the complete opposite. It really brings home how these big policy debates play out in very real ways, community by community.
Yeah, these examples really underscore those philosophical divides, those practical divides right at the local level.
So pulling back a bit, what does all this mean when we try to understand how immigration laws actually work, or maybe don't work, in the real world?
I think it means policy isn't just this top-down thing. It gets interpreted, it gets lived out, and sometimes, yeah, it gets actively contested right down at the city or town level.
That's a good way to put it, lived out and contested. So, okay, let's recap. We've kind of peeled back some layers here on the reported efforts by the Trump administration to secure the border. We looked at policy shifts like expedited deportation, the immediate return idea for Mexican immigrants, but also the challenges, the reported resistance within parts of the Border Patrol, and these dramatically different local responses like sanctuary cities.
Right. The sources highlighted both the scale of the ambition in those policy changes and the very real practical hurdles to getting them fully implemented everywhere.
So, for you listening, what really jumps out when you think about these different layers, federal policy, agency implementation, city choices, how do they all interact? It seems this deep dive really shows this constant tension, this push and pull, national goals up here, and local interpretations or resistance down there. And thinking about those examples we discussed, New York City and Montvale, what does that ongoing tension between federal aims and local autonomy really signal for the future of immigration enforcement in the U.S.? Something to think about.